Hi, this is Gary Collins, the creator of the Primal Power Method, and I am here with Erin Sharoni, the host and anchor for CBS Sports. She is also the creator and host of Live Like an Athlete podcast on cbssports.com. Thanks for coming on today, Erin.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think you have a very unique story, and I thought it was interesting how we found each other through the primal and paleo kind of ways. But nonetheless, we ended up talking and noticed we had a lot in common, and I really like what you're trying to do on your end as well because it's pretty unique. For those unfamiliar, would you kind of give a little background to how you ended up in the paleo and primal world?
Sure. Well, just to let everybody know, the way that I found you was on Twitter because you posted a photo of an egg inside of an avocado, and I tweeted at you and was like, what is that? I think probably because I was hungry at that point. I'm like, hey, you can cook the avocado? I never would have done that. I would have thought it would have been gross, but it was a good idea. So that's how I found you. And so the power of social media. And how I ended up in the primal paleo world was probably a similar path to a lot of people with a lot of resistance. I was like dragged kicking and screaming over time because I went from being a raw foodist and even trying to be a vegan. I was very sick, trying to heal myself. And my first foray into paleo/primal, really paleo, was that horrible high protein. You know, I had no idea about the fats, and a lot of people, unfortunately, still, when they think of paleo, think of really lean meats and tons of meat, which will probably actually kill you because it activates your mTOR pathways, you know. But anyway, that said, it made my particular illness worse, and so I said, that's it. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and nobody should do it. And so I preached against it for a while because I'm a very passionate person. I'm prone to hyperbole since I'm on camera. And then fast forward probably about 2 years, and I tried everything, and I did a ton of research, and ultimately came to the understanding that I needed to be eating a lot of fat, which I was really excited about because I never let myself eat fat.
Yeah.
And immediately my health changed and started improving. But I also did something very controversial too because of my particular illness and situation in concert with my doctor's supervision, which was the HCG diet, which actually I think is probably fairly commonly known among people in this particular community just because they tend to be more open-minded and educated on the various methods that people are using. And for me, at least, it worked very well. And it helped to reset my hypothalamus. I wasn't obese. I didn't need to lose a ton of weight, but it was for health issues. And that allowed me to be able to start consuming fat in a way that my body could process it. And then once I switched to that primal way of eating, it was like, you know, in the cartoons where the clouds part and the angels come down and it's like, oh, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and well, what people don't realize too is I deal with clients, and on my end, I have to explain to them that if you have, like most Americans, spent a large part of your life not consuming healthy fats, actually your gallbladder kind of goes into a dormant stage. Yes. And once you introduce fats, it takes a while for your gallbladder to react and the bile salts to be produced, and it is evolution. People think we've discussed this, think they can click over like that into a fat burner, because we read all this popular crap that people write, 21-day sugar detox, turn ketogenic tomorrow and whatever. And, it just doesn't work. It takes a while.
Yeah, that's a very good point about the bile salts, because that was something I specifically struggled with prior even to going primal, because like you, I had spent hours a day doing all this research, and I'm a smart enough individual that I was like, well, if the doctors aren't going to help me, I'm going to help myself. And, you may read too much, but at least you can parse out what makes sense. And one of the things that I came to was that I wasn't producing enough bile. And so I inaccurately, but it makes sense why I would think this, thought, well, my body, Erin's body, can't process fat. I must have some genetic malfunction. Yeah. So I started taking ox bile. And then I started noticing, and this time I was still sort of vegan. I don't know what I was doing. I wasn't eating a lot of meat. And I realized I was able to eat a lot of avocados and nuts without as much distress. And I was like, well, that's good, because I know these are good fats, and I love eating olives. So I was eating tons of olives. And the ox bile really helped. And I'm still taking that, actually, because my body still has a little trouble producing it. But I think over time, it gets better.
It does. And with that being said, with people who have traditionally eaten kind of a high carbohydrate diet, I always tell them we work with digestive enzymes and also maybe even a hydrochloric acid or HCl tablet to go along with it. Because when you eat a high carbohydrate diet, it inhibits your ability to produce HCl,
Right.
hydrochloric acid. Yeah. So there's a lot to it.
I take that too. And I also suffered from hypothyroidism, and that goes hand in hand with low stomach acid. It's sort of a chicken
Yep.
and the egg thing, but anyone who deals with that knows, there's that's a whole vicious cycle in and of itself. It also involves iron, which I'm still actually fairly anemic from years of just being anemic and also having a genetic predisposition. So when you have low HCl, you can't absorb the iron. It's a whole chain series of events.
Yeah.
But the good thing is that I feel like I'm back on track. And once I started eating the way that I guess my ancestors ate, which is how I like to think of it, what's right for my genetic code and enhancing my genes, I started feeling much better, and everything just so rapidly improved. I mean, the speed at which I saw, and it's not like, yeah, that turned keto overnight. No, that did not happen. I went through a very long process, but in terms of seeing the benefits, it was just unbelievable.
Yeah, in the beginning you get this kickstart, and I think what happens with people is they get so excited and they feel so much better. They think that they're back right on path, and I have to warn them. I go, it actually takes longer. Your body's going to adapt. It's going to go through these cycles, these ebb and flows where systems are kicking in, where hormones are starting to readjust. And it takes anywhere, to go through the whole thing, I would say on average 2 to 3 years. I mean, literally to go from start to finish to where you've got it kind of all mapped out and you're comfortable with everything. In your body, you kind of figure out where it's going to go. And so, I mean, don't get me wrong. Some people do it very quickly, but for the most part, I've noticed it takes this whole evolution of time for it to take full effect.
I noticed that too, that I had initial, like, very strong, but my body is also highly sensitive. Like, I'm one of those people that can, like, smell some herb that they shouldn't be having and have a reaction. I've always been that way. So while that's a very frustrating situation to deal with on most levels in daily life, I think it actually also means that you respond very quickly if you're going to respond in a positive manner. So I saw things really, really fast. But to your point, then I also had, like, changes. I was like, wait a second, where did all that energy go? Or wait a second, I lost 5 pounds in a week, and then 2 weeks later, the weight loss completely stopped, and I was like, but I'm doing everything right. I didn't. Oh my God, I ate like 2 chocolate chips yesterday. Maybe that was it, and you make yourself crazy.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's actually that the body is just finding that homeostatic balance, which is what it wants to begin with.
Yeah, and my philosophy is always, hey, it took you several decades to screw your body up. You're not going to change it overnight.
Right.
And that's what people forget too. I go, hey, you've been eating like crap basically since birth for most of us. And,
I haven't been, because my parents were, and I told you this when we first spoke, my parents were hippies. So, or that's what I call them. And I was really, I was born in the 80s, and that was really right around the time that they started adding high fructose corn syrup. I think the first year they may have added it was 81 or 79. I don't know. Anyway, point is that a few years later, my parents were already on the anti-high fructose corn syrup bandwagon. And as a kid, they would make me go to the store. And if I would pick up anything, we always shopped at health food stores. But if we were at like a Waldbaum's or a Publix or whatever, I'd pick up, a cereal or something. And my mom would say, does it say high fructose corn syrup? And I'd read it. And as soon as I got to the damn high fructose corn syrup,
it was there.
To put it back on the shelf. And I would tell kids at school, and they were like, even my teachers were like, oh, honey, that's just corn. That's not bad for you. And my parents were like, So I credit them at raising me a carob kid. We were still fairly low fat, and I ate way too many carbs for sure. They didn't know everything, but they did the best that they could. So thankfully, I hope I'm not too damaged.
Well, yeah. I mean, we all go through that, and that's an interesting point that, even when I was growing up, the health food stores, it was always whole grains and it was a lower sugar, but it was substituting honey and the natural sugars that even back then. but you look back and you go, yeah, that was healthier, but for most Americans, you were still overeating grains.
Absolutely.
And it was,
The doctor who got me started down this whole path, who I really credit her and my physician back in New York with really helping me a lot. But this woman, Kate Shanahan, wrote a great book specifically about genetics and changing your genes. And she asked me, I'll never forget, because she said, what was your breakfast as a kid growing up? What was your typical breakfast? And I'm like, I wasn't allowed to have any of that crappy breakfast cereal. I would cry and kick and scream. All I want is Captain Crunch. To this day, all I want is Captain Crunch. And my parents were like, no. So I had that, like fructose sweetened garbage from the health food store, but it was still, 2% milk. I had only whole milk as a kid, and then once my little sister was born and my mom tried to lose all the pregnancy weight, I remember we switched to skim milk, and I must have been 5, and I'm like, what is this crap? This tastes horrible. Give me back my buttermilk.
Tastes like water. Yeah.
So this doctor asked me, what did you eat as a kid? What was your regular breakfast as a kid growing up? And I thought back on it, and I'm like, well, it was always some form of cereal and milk or bread and butter. There was always some grain and always some dairy. And once my mom got on a weight loss kick, then we no longer had full fat dairy, which would have been a lot more preferable. And I remember hating the skim stuff. So it was just, you're right. It's most people. That's what most people do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, during this transition, did you notice any pitfalls? I mean, I know I ran into them, and I'm always curious to hear, what other people ran into as they started making the changes. And we all kind of go off. Some people are lucky they don't, but I went in a couple wrong directions that kind of messed me up, and I had to figure it out on my own.
Well, I certainly have a problem in overeating nuts, like you say in your book and your blog. Don't go nuts with nuts, but I think that's partly an effect of, like, A, I always like them. B, I'm half Middle Eastern, so I blame that on my heritage. I'm like, listen, in the desert they sit around in huts and they have bowls of nuts and seeds and they just like nosh on them and smoke a hookah all day. And so don't blame me, blame my ancestors. And I was raised on that stuff, But kidding aside, I ate way too much of that, because when you don't always know what to reach for, or something isn't readily available, then you're like, oh, well, I know almonds are safe, not the whole bag.
Yeah.
Macadamia nuts are safe, Erin, not the entire jar. I'll eat a whole jar of macadamia nuts. I might be the only person who won't get sick, but I'm sure that's a problem with my ghrelin response or something. But so, I overate some stuff. And then also, I think for a woman too, we have obviously, a lot of specific needs that are very different than you guys have. A simpler time of most things.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So with the hormonal fluctuations, I would say I was quite frustrated. And I God bless that doctor, because I emailed and called her every day, and I'm like, what's going on? I gained 2 pounds. My pants feel tighter. And she's like, well, it's day 19, so maybe you should calm down.
Yeah.
So not to be graphic, but, women, regardless of how old you are, you're going to deal with fluctuations. So there was sort of a learning curve of, like, you just got to let go, which I should practice what I preach, because I preach that in life anyway. It's like, just go with the flow. So be scientific and take all your notes and make all your spreadsheets like I do. Like, so I have a history of every single day, but at the same time, don't like jump to conclusions, or like she had told me, don't judge your weight today based on what you ate this morning. It may be inflammatory response, but most likely it's not. It's an accumulation of something else. So
yeah. Well, and that's common in general. I mean, your weight will fluctuate, and you don't want to fluctuate too much, but to fluctuate 2 to 3 pounds in a day is not that abnormal, no matter what you're eating. There's a lot of, not getting graphic, a lot of factors that could be going on.
Sure.
But that's why I teach, why I made my book so simple too, is we forget now that we're deep into it, and we've been doing this for a while, that when you first started, you didn't know anything. You were basically a blank slate in this whole holistic / primal paleo ancestral kind of a lifestyle, and that it took you a while. You had to make these mistakes. And so I try and eliminate those mistakes that I made and try and keep it simple for someone who, if I basically I wrote my book, if I was to start 10 years ago, what book would I want? And that's kind of how I look at things. And it's keep it basic, keep it simple. Don't worry too much. Don't try and do it all at once. Just take it in slow steps, learn as you go. And it makes it a lot easier. I think where a lot of people fail is they jump into it head first and go nuts right off the bat. And
that won't work. I mean, everyone's different, but like I said, I did it incorrectly. But when I initially tried it, a girlfriend of mine, and out in LA, Kelly, she's awesome. So if she ever watches this, she'll know what I'm talking about. Her has fibromyalgia, and so we both have an autoimmune disease. Mine is different, and she had adopted the paleo diet with an autoimmune protocol, and it like changed her body. I mean, she was beautiful already, but it completely, she lost all this weight, and she used to be a volleyball player. She's already tall and lean and gorgeous, and like she had all this muscle, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait to do this. My willpower, if anything, is my strongest trait. So I'm like, if someone tells me, here's the guidelines, I don't stray. Like there's no cheating. And I jumped in head first, and my body wasn't ready at that time because I was very, very sick. And it was a freaking train wreck of like all train wrecks. I mean, I think it made me way worse. And I remember being so angry because I was like, well, how unfair is this? What is this crap that every doctor is telling us that this doesn't work? This is horrible. Now, little did I know, I was eating coconut flakes, which I obviously should not have been, and I was eating way too much protein. There were things that I was doing wrong. So I think the problem is not so much that people jump in 100%. It's that they jump in 100% without understanding how to customize it for their needs. Yeah. Because while my friend Kelly can eat coconut chips till the sun comes up, I cannot. But I can also eat eggs and she can't, or whatever the case may be. So it's every single human body is different, and your body also changes over time with age and with stress and all that stuff. The other pitfall that I did have that I'll say this time around, and I forgot to mention, which is fairly common, and actually Gary Taubes mentions it in his book, which you recommended to me, Why We Get Fat. And he gives a good explanation for it. And I was like, oh, like as I was reading it, the light switch went on. And you mentioned it too in your book. I got very, very dizzy. I mean, to the point where I almost passed out. And it was quite scary because I was actually on the news desk in the middle of an interview with someone, and you have, what's called an IFB, and it's that's a little earpiece you see the anchors wearing. I know you know, but maybe someone watching doesn't know, where your producer talks to you. And then you're watching a monitor, and you're also listening to the guest talking, and you can hear yourself, and there's a lot of stimuli, and you've got bright lights. And I'm sitting on this desk, and I swear to you, thank goodness I was covered with a graphic, because I must have gone like that. I mean, the whole room spun, and I had been really fairly dizzy and kind of weak all day, and that was like kind of took the cake, because I've only fainted twice in my life, but it was that. It was like, oh my God, I'm going to go down, Yeah. And I couldn't stop and tell the producers, hey, can you cut the tape, because someone was talking. So I kind of just stuck with it, and I took a deep breath, and it passed. And afterwards I said, do you know how close I came to passing out on the news desk? But I didn't. And subsequently, realized obviously that I had to do with salt balance and all that sort of stuff. But it was very scary. Yeah. And I thought, for a minute, I questioned it. I thought, maybe I am being too aggressive. Maybe all this high fat and low carb is not healthy. Maybe it really isn't the right thing. But then it evened out.
That's why I teach, even though I don't break into a lot of people jump right into the intermittent fasting to get you in a ketogenic state, and they want you to instantly kind of downgrade your meals and get away from the 6 meals a day. And that's where experience comes in on my end. And I tell them, the reason I preach 5 to 6 meals a day for the beginner is because their blood sugar is completely screwed up, and their insulin levels, obviously. And if you want to really damage them,
yes,
start having them do prolonged fasts that they're not used to, and you're going to get exactly that. You're going to get dizzy spells. You're going to, all of a sudden, your blood sugar is going to crash. And it's kind of dangerous. And that's why I always tell people in the beginning, we want to keep you on the smaller meals to keep your blood sugar stable. We're not trying to just blast you and lose a bunch of weight and get in a ketogenic state. We're just trying to get you an even line on your blood sugar, at least close, because they're used to doing this all day long.
Right.
You know, and again, that's where a little experience comes in.
Yeah, and I have to say that was when the first thing I read on your blog after I found your avocado picture on Twitter, and then I saw that you were a former Food and Drug Enforcement agent. I'm like, this is fascinating, because all I do is talk about how I hate the FDA all the time. So this should be interesting.
I get it all the time.
We don't have to get into that, but what the first thing that I saw on your blog, which is what drew me to talk to you, was that you had this whole thing on intermittent fasting. And you're like, let me be really clear. Do not do this if you are not a fat adaptive person. And 99% likelihood is that if you're reading this, you are not, because most people are not. And I was like, thank God somebody said this, because while we can espouse the benefits of intermittent fasting, which granted, once you're in the right state, is probably a very healthy thing to do, it is so stupid and irresponsible of all these bloggers and even doctors, and forget all the trainers who have no training at all, telling people to do this crap. Do you know how sick I got trying to do that? And how many, even doctors, told me, oh, no, just push through it, don't worry. And for years, I would literally cry during the day, because I was like, I can't function. And I really felt like, you know, it makes you feel bad about yourself. It makes you feel like you're not doing it. And then you cheat, because invariably you have to survive somehow. So you feel like a failure. And it's just, on so many levels, it's so messed up. And I was so glad that you very clearly laid out the reasons why you should not do it. The other person who says it is the Paleo Mom on her blog. And she deals with a lot of women with autoimmune diseases like myself and my friend Kelly, who I mentioned. And she says the same thing. Like you said, this is a great thing to do if you're in the right space. But if you're not well, if you're sick, or if you're still a sugar burner, you need to do this really carefully and under supervision. Because until I had reset my body by going through the HCG diet, which is also very controversial, and it was hell. It was hell. It was not fun. But once I got to the other side of the tunnel, then I was able to now I can do the intermittent fasting, and I'm totally fine. Some days, because I'm still fairly new to all this, some days my body wants to eat all day. And then, you know what? I let it eat all day. I don't judge myself safely, you know, but you have to listen to your body. Like if you try to intermittently fast and you really feel like you're going to die, and you know it's not just psychological, then don't fast.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people too, is if you're intermittent fasting and you feel lightheaded that day or something's off, eat, you know, and see what happens. And yeah, that's where that blog post came from. Actually, it got really trendy. I'm trying to think, probably around a year ago. Everything goes up and down in trends, and you know, all the people who I like to give a hard time because they don't know anything, and they're calling themselves experts, and they started throwing intermittent fasting out there, and I went, you're going down a rough road because you don't know what you're talking about, and you're actually dangerous. And that's, you know, been an issue of mine as of late, is kind of going after a few people who I feel are doing a disservice to the movement and not having the background or understanding how some of these things work. Instead, they grab it off someone's blog, or, you know, they read it in someone's book and they go, I'm an expert. All right, let's do intermittent fasting so I can make you lose weight. And it's like, no, you know, and that's a big problem.
And even some people who are experts, I would consider, you know, a physician could be an expert in an area of, you know, in the area of metabolic health, but may still not be fully informed about one particular trend. So regardless of what someone's qualifications are, you know, I just think it's prudent to proceed cautiously with something that is a fairly extreme recommendation, in that it's a departure from the norm, whether that norm is a healthy norm or not. You know, it's still the norm. So if you're making a drastic change, even if it's for the better, you got to be careful. That's my whole thing.
Well, and with me, that's why I'm a little unique. I do this crazy thing, practice what you preach, which is getting fairly uncommon. But I also only do it from experience. I never tell anyone to do something that I have not yet done myself or have experience in. I mean, I've even taken women's vitamins to make sure, you know, like stuff I sell. I'll take the women's vitamins too to make sure I don't have a reaction, even though I could, because there is some little different stuff, but not really. It should, you know, and that's why I am. I'm not going to sell you anything or tell you to do anything that I haven't done myself, because I want to make sure it's safe. And, you know, it's just, I guess it's just, I'm a little unique in that sense. I mean, I did Weight Watchers, I did Atkins, I did all kinds of stuff. I wasn't overweight or out of shape. I just went, I need to know what this does to your body and how you react and what are the pitfalls in it, so I can understand when people come back to me and ask me a question. And I'll tell you, within the primal paleo world, one question I get asked all the time is Atkins. That has paid major bet. Yeah.
And I have to say, that's one diet that and I'm like you, I've experimented a lot. I mean, obviously we come from different, our motivations were different. Mine was out of literally sheer desperation. And also I'm a geek, so I find this stuff fascinating. So I mean, I've taken everything, you know, I'll tell you, as a former special agent, I've tried stuff that I'm sure, you know, was not supposed to be on the market. Nothing illegal, but it's all sorts of stuff. You know, so I used to do fitness competitions. I was on stage. You know what goes on in those gyms. Yeah. You know, people tell you, here, try this, here, try that. Thankfully, I never stuck a needle in myself, you know, other than if my doctor told me to. But I tried all sorts of stuff, and I'm not an athlete, so I was never had to be tested, so it didn't really matter. And I just really was very curious as to, like, I'm still very curious as to what things do, if it sounds like it's safe and it makes sense. Atkins is one thing that instinctually I was like, there is no way in hell this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And actually, the premise is not bad. It's the practice that's flawed. The premise, essentially, you know, ketogenesis, there's nothing wrong with being in ketosis for a short period of time. So that part was correct. But the part of, like, hey, the free-for-all with all the protein, I knew from a small child, my parents used to tell me how acidic protein made the body. So I always was like, listen, my parents might have been wrong on, you know, eating lots of honey or blackstrap molasses, but they certainly were not wrong telling me that protein is acidic in excess, because I know it is. That's just basic biology. So the Atkins, and also Atkins doesn't emphasize quality at all. There's no balance, and there's no discussion about quality, which is why I like the correct version of the primal movement, is because I was raised to really scrutinize, you know, organic and free range and ethically treated animals. It's just how I grew up. And so to me, it makes the most sense, you know?
Yeah. And that's a good point, because Atkins really was the beginning of the more ketogenic movement, where a lot of things actually spawned from that we know today in the ancestral health world or holistic health world. And it's interesting in the sense that I always tell people too, because that's where the term ketogenic and ketosis became very popular. And today I always get some of the people talking to me, and they go, yeah, you know, I like, you know, I'm going low carb, or I'm doing something to keep me in ketosis. And I go, well, you're not going to be in ketosis all the time.
And you also don't want to be in ketosis.
Yeah. I go, you understand the definition of ketosis, right? And these are people who are calling themselves experts again, because they'll say it to me, and I go, ketosis is an overabundance of ketone bodies in your bloodstream. You cannot actually have that, and if you're a true fat burner, your body will regulate to where you're not in ketosis. You're ketogenic, but you're not in ketosis.
I will never, ever forget when that Atkins trend started. I was obviously much younger, and I was home from school watching an Oprah episode. To this day, I say I love Oprah. I think she's great. But, you know, and Oprah's someone, obviously, every health expert talks about, uses Oprah as an example with her weight and blah, blah, whatever. But I remember she had done Atkins, because Atkins was really popular at the time. So she had one of the doctors on the show. And I swear to you, to this day, I remember her saying, all I wanted was an apple so badly. I just wanted an apple. And this woman was crying for a damn apple, and I was like, nobody let her eat an apple. An apple is not going to kill you. Like, that's when I was like, this diet is so irresponsibly executed, it's not even funny. I mean, what they're getting at is great, but if someone wants to eat an apple, let them eat an apple. Fructose is not processed the same way as high fructose corn syrup, you know? A Granny Smith apple is not going to kill you. So I just, that from then on, I was like, I'm not doing this trend. But it also pushed me away from the whole low carb movement in general. And that was unfortunate that it took me so long to get to this point.
Well, and Oprah is a great example because you're looking at someone who has unlimited resources, can hire the best of the best, and she still, I think to this day, hasn't figured it out and has gone through every trend. And that's why in my book, one of the principles is avoid extremes.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, if it sounds, you know, like a fad and it seems like an extreme approach, well, guess what? It probably is, and it's not going to work long term. And you can get any kind of, you know, fad to work short term. It's the long term goal that we're going after. We're here to change our health forever, not just to go to the beach or, you know, go on that trip, that vacation 6 weeks from now. And that's why I try to pound into people, you know, is that's what we're looking at, you know. And
I gotta say, Gary, I think a lot of people don't fully understand that concept, and I was one of those people. I mean, obviously, as a woman, you know, you're very conscious of how you look. We could do a whole other podcast on how horrible the whole cultural situation is, but we won't go into that. But then, as somebody who's also on camera for a living, obviously, I think I understand to some extent what Oprah's feeling and the kind of pressure. I mean, regular women have that pressure, so if you're also being scrutinized, it's even worse. And so I understand the fear motivation, which is what that is. It's a fear motivation. If I don't look a certain way, and men have it too, if I don't look a certain way, I won't achieve this. I won't get the promotion. I won't get the next job. No one will love me. I won't get that person. So the idea that we embark on these fads or even trying to change our diet for life because our motivation is to change the way that we look is really misguided. And I don't think that I ever would have understood fully how great it is to change your diet so that you feel better until I actually experienced feeling better. And not just my disease getting better, but legitimately, and I explained this to you the other day, I was like, wait, I was missing all of this energy? I didn't know living this kind of life was possible. I have no pain. There were times when I thought I had no pain, but now I realize that my entire life I'd been living in a limited fashion because I'm so much less limited now that it's all relative. So there's no way that I could have known. But it's like once you experience, get a taste of that drug of living the life that feels, a body that feels really good, you're like, screw the visual aspect. I mean, yeah, I care about how I look. I'm vain. I care about how I look. But I care a lot more that I can run on the beach and not be in pain, that I can bend down to squat down to pet my dog and my knee doesn't buckle. You know, I mean, that's a really big thing. Or wake up in the morning and have energy. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's the problem too, is our bodies get conditioned to being miserable, and we don't know that we're actually miserable. And I remember looking back, you know, into my 30s, and that was one of the worst periods of my life as far as health. I mean, it was when things really started falling apart, and all the accumulation of all the damage was catching up to me, you know, from playing sports and eating poorly and all the inflammation. And yeah, that's what I tell people. You have no idea how you're going to feel until you make this change, and you're going to look at it and go, wow, that is a huge, huge difference. I feel better today than I did, you know, in parts of my 20s. I mean, I feel that much better.
I definitely do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 32, but I mean, first of all, I just like life much better as I got older, which is a completely separate thing.
Yeah.
But in terms of how I feel, oh yeah. I mean, was I skinnier? I guess. I'm a perfectly normal weight. My body fat is very low, and I'm totally fine. But yeah, it was maybe I wore a smaller pant size, but so what? I was miserable. My body felt like crap. And now, you know, for the most part, it doesn't. And I'm sure that in another 5 months, if I came and talked to you again, I'd be like, remember when we had that conversation? I thought I felt so great. That was nothing. I feel so much better.
Well, yeah. So, yeah. And I'll be curious to, you know, obviously, we'll definitely follow up since you're in the well, you're never out of that's why I tell people, you're never done. It's always going to be a continuing experimentation because your body changes, and as you age, your hormones change. For guys and girls, it doesn't matter. So you're never going to just get it wired. You know, it's always going to be slight things. You're going to vary, in activity level could be changing. You could be training for, you know, a half marathon. You could be wanting to do triathlons. Well, with that, again, your body chemistry is going to change. So you're going to have to change your ratios of your diet. And so that's why I tell people, don't ever think you're just going to get it nailed down. You're going to follow this and it's going to be the exact same thing every day, because everything changes every day, from the amount of sleep you get to the amount of activity. And everyone's been programmed that, oh, my metabolism is pretty static. And no, it changes all throughout the day. You know, it's not this set point that it just sticks right there. It depends what you're doing.
There's also, you know, there's an interesting analogy when you talk about, for instance, and I'm assuming anyone listening knows about insulin resistance, right? Mm-hmm. Or leptin resistance. And you talk about the sensitivity. And essentially what we're all after is increased insulin and or leptin sensitivity, right? Because that's really the driving factor for almost everything in every aspect of metabolic health. And so I sort of think of our adjustments as we get healthier along this path as that sensitizing of the body, so that when there's not so much noise of I'm in pain, I'm inflamed, I'm overweight, my hair is falling out, my skin is dry, I have zits, I can't conceive, whatever any of the problems people might be, as those things fall away and quiet down, I think that you probably can hear your body a whole lot better. And so that tinkering becomes more intuitive, just like it would have been way back in the day before we had computer programs and Fitbits and all sorts of crap. You know, I mean, our ancestors, you want to talk about ancestral living, literally had to listen to their bodies. I mean, and I think that there's really that, I think that that's the next wave. And I've always been, I mean, I'm an intuitive, and so I've always talked about intuitive nutrition and intuitive health and all that stuff. But presuming that you don't have psychic abilities, then how do you get in touch with that, right? So I think as you become healthier, it's easier to hear what's going on. And it's really hard to hear when you're overweight or in pain or in a place of resistance, literally and metaphorically.
Yeah, and that's a good point, you know. And with that being said, what would, for you mean, we've all done this as far as starting on our journey. If you were to give advice to someone just starting in this, you know, just trying to get going, understand, you know, primal and paleo, and what advice would you give them in the very beginning to get started?
Well, I mean, I definitely give them a bunch of resources, you know, that I think are sound, because like you said, there's so much out there. It's not, I mean, your book is a good starting place. It's a great guideline for people that's not overwhelming with, I like scientific information, but not everybody does. And even I get overwhelmed. There's some great blogs, obviously yours included, but a bunch of really good ones with, I think, sound advice. So I would tell them to make sure that you're getting the right information. And if you have somebody who is actually an expert who you can talk to, whether that's a doctor like the doctor I worked with, or whether it's someone like you or another blogger, or even somebody like myself who has gone through that journey and who understands that my way is not the only way. You can have that sort of support system and someone who you can ask for advice and who's speaking to you from a place of true experience and knowledge, then I would say to seek that out. And then also, like, you got to find what works for you. So I mean, like we said, not every piece of advice is right, and you really have to be open to experimentation, and you really can't berate yourself. And if something doesn't feel good, stop. That's a good piece of advice. That's my number one thing. Like, just actually today, right before I came on here, I was listening to you know, Dr. Rosedale, who makes some great points and has some very sound advice about protein and da-da-da. And I was so excited about this podcast that he was on that I came home and I went to his website, and I don't agree with everything that he says. Does that mean that everything he says is wrong? No. It just means that for my body, not everything he says works. For instance, he says, when you're hungry, eat, but eat all the time. 6 meals a day is better than 3. And I was like, no. I've tried 6 snacks a day my whole life, and it never frickin' worked, because as my doctor, Kate, says, if you're trying to not be hungry, what's the use in, like, eating so that you're not hungry? That doesn't make any sense. Like, snack so I won't be hungry. What are you doing? You're telling your body to turn on and start manufacturing hormones. So, for instance, that point that he made, I was like, I fully disagree with this. But it doesn't mean that everything he says is wrong. It just means that I've tried eating 6 meals a day and I hate it. It doesn't work for me. But 3 meals does. Intermittent fasting now does. So it just depends, just listen to your body.
And it's good in context. That's a good example of in context, because we believe in 6 meals a day in the beginning, or four. I don't say 6. I say 4, 5, or 6, depending on who you are in the beginning. But you don't want to eat that way the rest of your life. It doesn't work. I've been there too. I ate 6 meals a day for, God, I don't even remember how many years. It was probably 15 years. It didn't work. It flat out didn't work. But it does work if I'm working with people who are into bodybuilding or, offensive linemen. Then I have to, because we're trying to make them big and strong. And they know, though, I always explain to them, you're not going to eat this way for the rest of your life. This is to achieving a goal in athletics. This is not a life choice.
Right.
And there's a big difference.
In their off seasons, they're eating differently. And maybe I misread what Dr. Rosedale said. Maybe he meant, as you are in this transition period, you can have a snack or two. That I understand. I used to need to do that too.
Yeah.
The more fat adapted you become, as you say in your writings also, the less you actually need to eat. And so I always pay attention. I find it very interesting, because some days I'll still find myself hungry. Like yesterday, I was ravenous. I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why do I want to eat all day? I was really hungry. And then I thought about it. I'm like, I didn't sleep well last night at all. I know where my hormones are, so there's that. Maybe there's something that I ate. I ate a lot of fructose last night from berries and stuff, which is sugar, late. So who knows? Maybe that threw the whole thing off. So then I ate a bunch of nuts as a snack, and that was it. At least I didn't eat, a tortilla. But the point is like it's not always gonna be perfect. Some days I don't eat from the time I wake up until 2 o'clock, and I'm fine. So
and there's and that's what I tell people. There's no magic formula for this. There's no way I can give you a perfect eating cycle and tell you how to do it. I can give you a baseline, and from the baseline you've got to figure it out. Because I can go 24, 36 hours without eating, and it's not a big deal. I don't do it all the time, but there's some days when I'll eat literally all day long, because I feel like I'm starving, and it's probably because my body's saying, okay, you've broken something down, or you're trying to rebuild, or like you said, I ate something wrong that threw my hormones off, or threw off insulin somehow, and all of a sudden ghrelin kicks up, and I'm like, oh, I'm hungry. I need to eat. I need to eat. But I don't know. But will that kill me for one day? No. That's just long as you don't do that every single day, you're fine. But if you have that day here and there and it happens, that's perfectly normal. So, it's real exciting what you're doing too on CBSSports.com. You have this podcast that I've been listening to, and I'm real excited about, where you kind of get in, obviously, it's mainstream and it's entitled Live Like an Athlete, but you bring in some of the Paleo Primal elements into it, and some of the people who have written books and are kind of into it. Can you explain what your podcast is about and how it came to be? Sure.
It's something that I always wanted to do in television format, and no one would let me do it because I didn't have the clout or the credibility yet, I guess, or the production company or the money. But I fully believe that it will eventually be a show, whether I do it or somebody else does it. It's inevitable, because it dovetails sports and wellness. I mean, come on, hello. Yeah. There's to me, that's the most fascinating part of the whole thing. But I obviously love the human body, and all that sort of stuff is interesting. Not everyone finds it interesting, but the whole point was, look, people like athletes because they want to be like them. It's that commercial "Be Like Mike" from the 90s. People buy his shoes because they think they're going to play basketball like Michael Jordan, and some, you're not, but some level of you wants to be like Mike, or like substitute athlete X, your favorite athlete. And so with that in mind, I thought, well, wait a second, I'm in a position to access not only these athletes, but their trainers, their doctors, their physical therapists, their chiropractors, their psychologists, their meditation gurus, their yoga teachers, whoever is helping them actually live the lifestyle of an athlete. Now, I cannot afford a chef like Dwayne Wade has living in his home.
Yeah, me neither.
Most people cannot yet. But you don't need that. The point is you want to find out what are the driving factors, and then how can we take that information and reappropriate it for the average person, because let's face it, you don't need to eat the exact same way that Dwayne Wade is eating, but it would be cool to see what principles he follows. So it was the whole thing, the whole concept of lifestyle. How does an athlete live, eat, breathe, sleep, go on vacation? What kind of tools do they use? What kind of gadgets do they use? So I figured there were endless possibilities, and it's been pretty cool so far. And the reason that there's been paleo discussion is because, honestly, just by default, and I'm not seeking out only the primal community.
Oh, of course, yeah.
This is what people are using because this is these are the principles that right now, from what we understand in science at this time, works. Might it change in 10 years? Maybe. But right now, this is what works, and this is what we know works. And so because it's popular, because it does work, more people are implementing it, which means that more people who I'm going to speak to are going to talk about it naturally. I had a trainer on the first time, my friend Madhu O'Hara. He's a strength and conditioning coach. He works with top athletes, brilliant kid. And he wasn't even a nutrition discussion, but he follows the primal diet.
Yeah.
Less. When he coaches his NFL guys in off season, the way he's feeding them throughout their workouts and the advice he's giving them is consistent with the paleo primal principles, as well as the paleo primal principles of movement and of exercise, because it all goes together. So I think that as the podcast continues, we'll just have more and more of this kind of stuff because, the cream rises to the top, so to speak, right?
Well, yeah, and it will evolve like anything. And it's even though it's very popular, especially the term paleo, primal is a little different because it's a tweak.
Yes.
And primal, most people don't have a clue the difference between primal and paleo, but primal is more of a lifestyle and has some tweaks in the diet. And paleo is basically focused on diet.
Right.
Yeah. And
some like you interchangeably just because it's a pop culture term sort of, so people understand the gist of what we're getting at. But yes, you're right.
But it is fairly new. So, I mean, it's catching on, and it's going to take time, just like Atkins. Atkins had been around quite a while before it got more popular, and he'd put, thousands of patients through it before it, kicked in. He had his book and everything else. And today it's amazing because it still lives. I mean, he's passed. I can't even remember when he passed, but it's still around. It's still very popular. The company's still very popular. We're not saying go Atkins, but it takes a while. I think the paleo primal movement, it's still got legs under it, and it's got to kind of find its way. And I totally agree. I think there will be some mainstream TV show based on this lifestyle, not the Dr. Oz circus show. He has some good stuff, but man, he does some stuff
I like Dr. Oz, actually.
That there's some stuff that he throws in there that actually contradicts all the good stuff, and it makes it. That was my thing with him, is he makes things very confusing because he's got to fill a show. He's on TV. You got to keep going, and if you were to do primal or paleo, it would take 3 weeks, and your show would be over, and that would be it.
Right? Yeah. I mean, he can't. He doesn't have whatever. I don't know. I would say he doesn't have the luxury of time.
Yeah.
He could do whatever he wants, but you're at the behest of sponsors, which is another issue.
Absolutely,
so,
yeah.
With what he has, I actually think he does a fairly good job. Listen, he's the only one doing it.
Only one. You're right.
Think what you want of him, but I don't know any other mainstream television person who railed against the dental industry for poisoning us with mercury, and then he got backlash, big time.
And
I said, good for you for sticking your ground, Dr. Oz, and saying exactly what you thought versus what your network may have wanted you to say because they knew that there were sponsors to be had. Because who knows? I don't know. The toothpaste manufacturer would be pissed off when you talk about fluoride.
Oh,
so
the Dental Association.
I applaud him for doing that. What's that?
I said the American Dental Association. So I mean, yeah. It gets real tricky, and you're talking to a guy who is right in the middle of all this, especially with all the companies involved in dealing with FDA and everything. And it's a slippery slope. It's real tricky, and to get out there and stick your neck out, it's tough. It is really tough. Yeah. And I would love to do a show like that someday. But I'm like I don't have the clout, and you got way more clout than me, obviously, in the business. I'm just a guy trying to help people and get out there, but I would love to. I'm trying my best to get it out there more and more, and that's why I was so excited about what you were doing, because you're introducing it into a place where it hasn't been introduced before, which is really exciting to me.
Thanks. So. Yeah, it's a different audience for sure, but I think people are really interested. Like they're genuinely interested. People are for as much as when people are sort of in this insular world in a particular movement, they kind of tend to, in any movement, shun the outside. Oh, these people don't understand, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, they don't understand. And it's not because they're all stupid or resistant. It's because some people just don't know any better, and you can't fault them for that. So you might as well, you know, instead of being mean or being elitist, why don't you share the information so people have the free will to do what they want with it? You know, that's my...
Totally agree. I've been called an elitist a few times, and I was like, what? You ever see how much free information I give away and how the way I explain things? And it's a little ironic how that came back at me a few times from people who actually are elitist, who are claiming that I was. Interesting. I think you know one of them. But with that, I don't know. Maybe it came up recently. But I'd really like to follow the progress, and I'd love to have you back and talk about the journey and talk about your podcast, because I'm really looking forward to watching it evolve. I'm subscribed. So,
subscribe.
Yes. Tell them where to go to be able to subscribe to your podcast and also your shows that you have on CBS Sports TV in general. Yeah.
Well, if you just go to cbssports.com, everything is there. So I'll probably pop up in one video or another at some point. And then for the podcast on iTunes, if you just go to iTunes, the name of the podcast is Live Like an Athlete. So if you type in Live Like an Athlete, the little CBS Sports Live Like an Athlete icon will come up, and you can just subscribe. It's right now, there's no copycat, so it's the only one called Live Like an Athlete. So that's what will come up if you type that in. And it's funny because I got some Android users tweeting back at me like, hey, is there any non-iTunes thing? Like, what is this iTunes? I'm like, you can still use iTunes even if you have an Android. Can't you like download some app? I don't know. But it turns out there's another app called Stitcher, which my podcast is also on, and that is for Android. So gotcha. Android users, fear not.
Fear not. It's there everywhere, and they can go to the website. That's where I listened to it at. I went to the website and I listened to it there. So.
Oh yeah, or that too. And then I always write a little blog post with each thing. Actually, tomorrow, taping the next episode, which will be out probably Thursday or Friday. But it's interesting because I went literally from doing a Primal Paleo episode with Kate Shanahan talking about ancestral eating, and then we're going to go into my guest will be celebrity trainer Robert Brace, who's fantastic, and this comedian Mark Malkoff, who used to write for the Colbert Report, and he's the comedian that lived in IKEA for a week. I don't know if you remember. A couple of years ago, it won like an Ad Age award.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Literally lived in IKEA and then filmed it, and like, what else did he do? Oh, he did this other really funny thing where he brought a goat into the Apple store to prove that you can do anything in the Apple store and they don't care. Like, he ordered a pizza there. He brought a goat in, which I was like, what is going on? He does all sorts of crazy stuff, but he went vegan for 28 days.
Yes.
And Robert Brace trained him.
Yep. I watched that.
Got ripped. But
yeah.
I was like, well, you know, it's only fair that if we have a primal show, that the next one we have a vegan show, because I'm not ashamed. I was vegan for 6 months, or tried to be, and it didn't work for me. But like I said, I learned a lot from it. So we'll have to see. I know Mark is no longer a vegan.
Yeah. No, I watched that. It's funny that you say that, because before we ever met or talked, I'd watched that. I watched it on YouTube. Yeah, it was good. It was actually pretty entertaining. It's not very long. Yeah, it's not very long.
No, but his transformation is crazy. Although, to be fair, he's like a skinny little guy. So even though he was like skinny fat, so he just didn't have like any tone. So I'm like, well, Robert's a really good trainer. I'm sure you could have whipped your butt into shape whether you ate meat or not for 28 days. And being a vegan will take a toll on you after 28 days, not within 28 days.
Yeah, and that's, again, what people don't know. That's where you kind of experience kicks in again, that, you know, I'm not against veganism as a certain tool, but long-term, everyone knows I'm not a fan of vegetarianism or veganism for a long-term lifestyle. It's got too many pitfalls. But I'm also not one to say never. If you do it right, which is very, very difficult and time-consuming, yeah. But most people, 99.9% of people out here who do it, screw it all up, and that's a problem as well. So.
I did find very interesting in Gary Tao's book, I think it's him, who cites some example of how the cancer rates in poor Indian villages, or actually it was all of India. I could be completely misquoting this, but where they were vegetarian, the cancer rates were astronomical, as opposed to some very poor areas in other parts of the world where they ate mainly a high-fat, moderate protein, low-carb diet, where it was almost all from fat. Their cancer rates were, non-existent. And I think there were sort of commensurate living conditions. And so I was like, really? That's interesting. Just a bunch of interesting stuff. So,
well, that's because cancer cells feed off sugar, but they cannot feed off fat. That's why a high-fat diet, they've started doing studies on it showing how it reduces cancer. And one day I'll share a good story of an oncologist I investigated and some of the things he said about our modern cancer-fighting techniques. It was eye-opening. It's one of the things that made me leave one of the things that made me leave the FDA. So
really,
oh yeah, it was a little life-altering experience. So maybe we'll talk about that sometime.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to get me going down that rabbit hole.
I know it is. We could go forever on numerous topics, but we'll cover a lot of stuff. Like I said, I hope to have you back and we can continue the journey together. I really enjoy it.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.